Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's Thrive in China Roundtable, where we're going to be looking at what's eating away at my profit margins in China. For nearly all companies that are in their startup phase in China, profit margins are always going to be under pressure. And if you're running a business in China and you're seeing that your profit margins are eroding, you're not alone. So where do we go from here? Well, first of all, you've got to be aware that your profit margins are eroding. That's step number one. And in this roundtable, we're going to be looking at 4 areas that could be contributing to the situation. And we're hopefully going to offer some solutions to help businesses develop more innovative reflexes, drive change, and generate healthier profits. The 4 areas that we're going to look at, and again, a lot of this might seem like common sense, but again, it's something to evaluate, particularly in your startup phase, is are you selling at the right price? Are you overspending? Are you finding economies of scale? And is outsourcing to third parties costing you more? So let's get cracking on today's roundtable. The reason number one for potentially having eroding profit margins is the price right? The fact is that good pricing is just generally very hard to do. It's not a number that you can pluck out of thin air, all right? So one item that I mentioned in last week's roundtable was around faulty leadership traits and why some businesses are not successful in the Chinese market. And one of those reasons was actually number blindness, meaning where companies are not paying attention to evaluating their P&Ls, not evaluating their profit margins, not evaluating and analyzing the numbers that are going through the business. Now, pricing is something that many new and young businesses in China overlook. What do I mean by this? Well, potentially all companies that go into China would have done some form of competitor benchmarking, price analysis as to where they should be placing themselves within the market. So you've done your research, you've done your benchmarking, you've made decisions on your pricing in terms of your products or potentially your services, and you've executed and gone into the Chinese market. But it doesn't just stop there. Even if your initial pricing at launch was based on sound assumptions and rationales, they might not hold true for very long. And something like the pandemic or the Shanghai lockdowns that occurred in April, May, early June, you have to be able to pivot your business swiftly, all right? In addition, not until you actually start selling and you start transacting in the market can you really test out your assumptions. The fact is, again, that pricing is very hard to do. You can't just pick the numbers out of thin air and make the assumption that it's all going to go smoothly and you don't have to change your numbers or pivot yourself. Nor does it lend itself to trial and error, right? Changing your pricing too much will put customers off. It may even confuse them. If you offer too much discounts, again, it might not give such a great reputation towards the company. So one approach is to establish comprehensive database of intelligence. By whatever means, if you have the budget and the ability, going with reputable agencies who can give you that database of intelligence, or alternatively, going into the field yourself and analyzing the market. My husband, who's in the F&B sector, working in finance, whenever we go to a new jurisdiction, one of his favorite things to do is to go into a supermarket and actually analyze the brands that are on the shelves, looking at the pricing, looking at the displays, and actually doing his in-field market intelligence. Learning what everyone else is doing, building up that comprehensive picture of a real marketplace in which you operate in at this time, it may be quite different to the one you researched right from the beginning. Okay. Also, invest strategically in genuine pricing studies. It will take time. It does take resources, but it is going to be worth it. And the reason why I say that is that it helps you to really understand how pricing works in China in your sector and what you need to do to price optimally for your own business. All right. So from the 4 points that I highlighted on this slide, really don't rely purely on what you're launching your products on in China. Make sure you're continuously looking on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis to see if you have to pivot. Avoid number blindness. Make sure your head is in the stats. Be willing to adapt as quick as possible. Make sure you've got decision makers on board that will be making those difficult decisions straight away. And then build this comprehensive database of intelligence that will help and guide you through this process. Reason number 2 is overspending. And the question that I raise is somebody controlling your finances? Now, obviously, common sense is going to tell you that when you start up your business in China, you should have created a budget, right? When you are launching your business in China and you are in this startup phase, there is no room to overspend. As your business is growing, you may feel it's too time consuming to stay on top of every item spent by every department every day of the week. But can I just tell you, somebody should be doing. If it's not you as a leader, it should be somebody within your team or your headquarters, somebody who is controlling your expenditure in the Chinese market. Now, I say controlling, it might sound like it's a very rigid policy and you cannot do any payments, or if any opportunities arise in terms of marketing, you can't. No, it's a matter of having somebody there who helps you evaluate whether it truly makes sense to spend, to then eliminate from another department so that you have a balanced, I guess, expenditure list, and that you are not just grabbing at every opportunity and saying, yes, I'll pay for this, I'll pay for this, I'll pay for that, I'll pay for this. All right. To protect the margins, you've really got to stay on top of this. Now, for a start, budget in a detailed and disciplined fashion is something that has to be monitored. Okay, you've got to be realistic about what you can and can't monitor, but ideally make your budget process as granular as possible so you have visibility over the key trends. Invest in a decent cost control system that's appropriate to the scale of your business, whether that's using your head office as that guideline, hiring somebody to do that for you, you allocating time within your own organization to do it, or using an outsourced provider and using those services to help you control your spending. All right. Now, ultimately, if you are at a certain size, it will make sense for you to hire a financial controller or at least a financial analyst with the right skill set and experience to monitor, control, and evaluate your spending on a day-to-day basis. Now, obviously, this may be too expensive to have from day one of your launch, but eventually this is something that should be within your mind as you are progressing. Now, one side I can say is if you are to outsource your financials to an accounting provider, they can obviously monitor and control your spending as well, but it is not an immediate service that they're going to offer. Usually, if you're outsourcing your accounts to an outsourced provider, their main objective is to make sure that your financials are done according to PRC regulations, that the tax deadlines are met, and that you're operating in that way. If you now want to use them in order to do financial controlling, that's probably an additional service that you're going to have to keep an eye on. What you want to do is create a cost-effective solution for you as you are building up the business, launching the business, building up the business, and then growing and scaling, okay? Now, having solid information about where you're spending and why, the critical thing is why, is really the first steps towards keeping everything under the control. And then understanding where you can trim back where necessary, okay? Take advice about the systems that are available to help your business. There are lots of them around. You can have software systems that are app-based that are controlling the spending. If there's one thing you can do to protect your profit margins that is within your control, it's this. Now, obviously, cost control is unglamorous. There's always going to be a bad guy who has to do this job, but it is an essential day-to-day process, okay, which really could make the difference. It's going on top of these third parties, logistics providers, warehousing providers, repackaging providers that really, really will make the difference in how you grow and scale and how you maintain your profit margins. All right. Now, looking at my husband and our firm ourselves, the finance people are always the enemies. The marketing department hates us. The logistics department hates us. Why? Because we're always on top of people, making sure that they are minimizing the costs as often as possible. But what I want to highlight is get away from that mindset where the finance people are the enemies. The finance people, their role within the organization is to make sure that you become profitable as soon as possible. So yes, if they have to be the bad guy, it is because you're overspending. It is because you are not thinking about the long-term vision of the company and the growing and the scaling and what budget is available. Reason number 3 is, are you finding economies of scale? Now, for those of you that are not finance people that are watching this either live or on replay, let me give you a definition of what economies of scale means. This is basically a proportionate saving in cost gained by an increased level of production. Look at the things you can control as well as the things you can't. Now, this is mainly for distribution and manufacturing companies. Economies of scale don't just happen of their own accord as the business grows, and getting information on where and how to achieve such savings is always going to be tricky. It takes hard work, market intelligence, analysis about your company, your competitors, and your customers as well. Often, you won't be able to achieve economies of scale without significant upfront investment, especially if you're in the manufacturing sector, where you may need to invest in factory space, in machinery, equipment to achieve the lower unit costs that come with scale production. You do need to plan carefully. You do need to assess the different market scenarios that may arise and plan in detail what those risks actually look like. Look at things that you can control as well as the things that you can't, like I mentioned earlier. Analyze the market. Right? Like the questions that I've highlighted on this slide, can it absorb your increase in production at a price that will maintain your margins? What about time scales? Are you prepared to run at a loss for a certain period of time? And then can you make up the market share at a later date? Do you have reserves and funding to help you invest in this kind of business building? You've really got to assess the risks. Be disciplined in your thinking regarding this problem. Take advice from experts about what the market can absorb. Then if the time is right, bite the bullet and invest as much as you can to reduce your eventual marginal costs. It might be the best that your distribution company or manufacturing company will achieve. And then last but not least, it's reason number 4, right? Is it time to move services in-house? Now, let's talk a little bit about this. All right. So when you are starting, let me backtrack a little bit. Most foreign investors, when they go into the Chinese market, most of the time, in order to limit headcount and to really focus on the actual business and the idea of growing and scaling, they're going to outsource a lot of their operations to third parties. So if you are looking at the supply chain, you're outsourcing warehousing, you're going to outsource the actual transportation of goods. You might even outsource customs clearance. You might outsource who the importer of record is. You might outsource a lot of functions, right? You might outsource also the pick and pack, the assembly, etc. From an administrative point of view, you might outsource the legal aspects of the business, the accounting, the tax aspects. You might outsource headhunting. You might outsource the payroll functions. From a marketing perspective, you might outsource things to media agencies, PR agencies, and alternatively, you might also outsource to distributors, licensees, etc. Right? Those can be also sales channels that you operate in. So obviously, you're doing this to minimize your cost because the feeling is if that you hire this in-house team of people, you're going to be already 10, 12 people from day one. And you don't really know from day one what their true skill set is. So it's better to outsource to the experts who've got the experience, the teams are already developed, and you start off with them as you get familiar with the market. Makes sense, all right? But what a lot of people do is that they get very, very comfortable in those positions. It is easier to work with third parties than have to go through the recruitment process of hiring in-house individuals, not really knowing if they have the true expertise, starting to have turnover of staff, and potentially having the business halter because you've got to clean up, right? First, you have to take over from the third parties and then clean up and build the team. But you still have to evaluate if this makes more sense for your business. And as there's this component of laziness that becomes quite easy to see over time, it's important to evaluate certain things. So you've got to look at the cost, you've got to look at the talent, you've got to look at the recruitment, and you've got to look at the specialization and the language and the culture aspect of things, okay? So make sure that you are focusing on why you're really outsourcing and evaluating that consistently, okay? So let's go through some of those points, right? So cost, is it cheaper? Okay, this is a question mark. Is it cheaper to outsource versus hiring an in-house team? It's always a balancing act to figure this out. The other is talent. Will you be able to find the skill set that you need in people to continue, if not even grow and scale the organization from the third party? Recruitment. I can tell you in China, it's always a bit of a pain to do recruitment, especially now with the pandemic when people aren't willing to travel to do face-to-face interviews. You're basically relying on Zoom or Teams meetings to interview people and follow your gut instinct without actually shaking hands and seeing them vis-a-vis in terms of the hiring. Not an easy thing to do, especially when you're not there to do the onboarding process either. Focus. Can you really concentrate on what really matters in the business if you are actually spending 50% of your time on HR issues because you're building up an in-house team? Or is it easier for you to outsource everything, the day-to-day tasks, and just worry about, making sure those providers are doing the right jobs? Where should your focus be lying? And again, there's no right or wrong answer here. Every leader within an organization needs to evaluate this. Specialization is also a key aspect, hiring the real expertise, especially if you're in a sector industry that is niche. And then language and culture, right? I would hope that you would be using third parties that you have the ability to communicate with and have transparency with. If you don't have that, then you obviously have to either move providers or hire somebody in-house that you can actually truly communicate with so that you have transparency and clarity over what's going on within the business. Now, there are strong arguments in favor of outsourcing, but some of them contain hidden dangers too, like going back to costs, right? Companies need to go through the process of evaluating the monthly service fee, if you will, of that third party against what the payroll headcount would be for somebody who takes that role over. Also looking at the quality of the service. Now, every service provider doesn't just have one client, they have multiple clients that they are collaborating with and working with. All right. So obviously, quality is always probably going to be a little bit less within a service provider than if you have somebody who's working 100% full-time for you. All right. You will get faster replies from an in-house headcount than you will probably from a service provider that's trying to answer 60 emails in a day from 60 different clients. All right. In addition to that, looking at talent, generally speaking, service providers will have staff who have specific expertise, but sometimes you need somebody who has a little bit more of that extra. And you won't find that unless you hire somebody in-house. And again, it goes to the side of recruitment. Recruiting is always a tricky subject, especially when you can't physically be on the ground, but it means it gives you that control in-house of finding that skill set that pool of expertise that you truly need to build and scale your company. Now, my philosophy on this is that you do need a certain period of time within China, operating within China, to know what you are actually looking for in a candidate. Okay, you probably will not know that within the first 1 to 2 months of operating in China. So really use that first year, 12 months of working with third parties to understand what you're looking for, and break that down. The other side of recruitment is obviously the fact that recruitment is in your own control. You choose, you decide who's going to be on your team. If you are outsourcing to a third party, that third party chooses which people to allocate for your business. You don't have control over that. So obviously, if you're recruiting within your own organization, you are building up that team based on your training, based on your onboarding process, based on how you plan on nurturing that staff over time, right? And again, talent is always this big issue where you're evaluating, are people going to leave me after a certain period of time? Will there be high turnover? I mean, this is only something you can evaluate over time. Then, of course, there may be sensitive information or difficult information that can't be passed on to third parties because of GDPR regulations or whatever else is going on within your organization, or IP issues, where you don't want to reveal certain things about the growth and scale of your business. You prefer to keep that in-house versus spreading that information. Now, you can always get away with signing NDAs and whatnot, but there is obviously this confidentiality aspect that you always have to think about. That's stronger when you build an in-house team than if you outsource to, I don't know, 3 to 10 different service providers. Outsourcing, if you choose to do it, must have real tangible benefits for you, okay? But also for your reputation and your image standing within the territory of China, okay? Outsourcing is not something that should be indefinite. It is something where you should be pivoting over time and bringing things in-house. My philosophy with my clients is that we don't want generally longer relationships than 5 years, because we expect that within those 5 years, the company grows to a certain size where it makes sense that they start building their own in-house admin team. Okay, especially in a country in China where most organizations, when they are establishing and setting up subsidiaries, are actually operational. And the goal and objectives for all of them is to grow and scale in the market. So our philosophy is you shouldn't need us for more than 5 years, because after 5 years, you should already have this in-house team of admin, finance people that are helping to support your business. The same with media agencies. At some point, they will become less useful because you will want to have your own brand managers that are in-house, that are controlling the social media content, because they truly understand the philosophy of the company, the ethics around the company, and how they want to sell the company to consumers or to other B2B wholesalers, distributors, etc. So please, please do think about evaluating consistently the third parties that you are working with. In conjunction to this weekly Thrive in China Roundtable, this week I'm also doing a workshop series on incorporating in China. And in one of the episodes, we're talking about the value ladder. The value ladder for me is, how do you want to work with third parties in China? There are some third parties where they're just going to close the eye and basically they do the job for you, right? There are others who will probably add a little bit more added value. For me, the best third parties to collaborate with are those who want to grow with you. They are invested in helping you to make certain decisions about the growth and scaling of your organization. They become an extension, if you will, of your board of directors, where strategy comes into play. Those are the best third parties. You want to work with logistics providers who are thinking not just right now about the capacity that's needed, but what is needed in the next, 1, 3, 5 years. And they're thinking about growing with you as you are growing your business. The same with media agencies. I prefer media agencies that are thinking about the long-term relationship and thinking about how to develop the brand, not just about what's happening now and fulfilling a service. All right. So when you are evaluating these third parties, and it does sound like a full-time job, remember that if it does make sense to move from one provider to you can do many things. You can change from one provider to another provider, or you can change from one provider to developing things in-house within your organization. Okay. I love the first sentence. Make sure the relationships will generate value throughout that relationship. If you see that there is no longer a value add with those providers, it is time to bring things in-house. Or again, like I said, to change providers who will bring you that value. But to save money, most of the time to change providers will not always work. While the focus may be to save money, it must also include achieving a strategic advantage, right? And maintaining a good reputation with your suppliers. Pardon my language, you don't want to piss off your suppliers, your third party, right? They are there to actually provide added value, all right? If you start blaming them, especially in today's China, working with third party providers have no issues in terminating contracts with clients. All right. So maintaining that relationship with them so that you're all going to achieve the same goal and objective is key. Think always about transitioning. All right. And again, this is really a full-time job. It's working with third parties, right? And understanding what is their value add. Are they continuing to provide value add? Is there a cost benefit working with them? A conversation this morning I had with a client was, actually, for one specific service, now that our staff is more and more trained, could we bring that in-house? Of course you can. You want to work with third parties that also offer you this that you can transition in-house teams. You might want to work with a media agency that does all of your social media content, but eventually you want your brand manager to only manage the WeChat mini program. There's so many ways you can work, but you need to also work with suppliers or third parties that are going to offer you this flexibility. Establish solid rules and expectations with the third parties, right? Build contingency plans. I always say have a backup plan of 2 to 3 providers in case you have to switch. It's going to be faster to transition to another third party than going through the process of recruitment. You know, you have to calculate always maybe 1 month for the recruitment process, and then the candidate has to provide a 30-day notice period. So it will take about 2 months for a transition to occur instead of just transitioning to another company. So think about all of these aspects when evaluating agencies. And remember, this can help you with your profit margins, all right? This is something where you can lower your costs over time. So summary of the keywords that I want to highlight today is business plan and budget, right? Create a business plan and a budget on an annual basis. And as you're doing your budget and you're looking at the fees that are being generated by third parties, and again, this is everything from logistics companies to lawyers to media agencies, etc. Evaluate if at some point it does make sense to start bringing things in-house and to compare those scenarios and those business models. For point number 3, simplicity. You want to have a simple business model. Why? Because you still might not have the time available to build this in-house team and manage this in-house team. It might be more simple for you to manage third parties. And if that is the case, the minute that you that's not value to you, plus they're expensive, it means it is time to switch to a provider who might be at a similar cost, but is providing you that value add. The goal should be to keep always a business model as simple as possible, work with providers that you like, but at the same time, keep your costs down. Use resources from your head office, right, to help you analyze your financials, especially if you're not a numbers person, so that you are, again, keeping things simple. If by keeping simple, it makes sense to have a financial analyst sitting right next to you to operate and build the business, then that is the direction that you need to go in. You want to have a business in China that provides you with freedom, flexibility, and the ability to be able to pivot and transition whenever needed. Okay. but at the same time, maintaining the profit margins that you wish to maintain. Opportunity always falls at your doorstep in China. The question is how to evaluate those opportunities and understand what the return on investments are for those opportunities. Opportunities is what can lead to overspending. So it's important to have this right-hand person, this financial analyst or the HQ, helping you to analyze each opportunity to understand, is it worthwhile? Do we execute or do we change at a later stage? Last but not least, it's knowledge is power. The more that you know about how to operate your business, how to make your business more efficient, as well as saving cost, the better you're going to do. Right? So continuously build up on your knowledge level. And last but not least, watch your investment. We have a lot of clients, and I say this from the perspective of the HQ, who focus so much on the details of the incorporation phase of their entities in China, but then don't necessarily follow up continuously on the operational side. So if you are a leader that's sitting in the HQ and you're responsible for China, or you are sitting in China and you are responsible for China, continuously watch your investment. And the first way of doing that is looking at your financials and understanding where the business is going. So that's the end of today's presentation. It was a very short roundtable. If you do have any questions, please do list them in the chat box. And when I stop the recording, I will go into those questions. But I always ask people who come live, what was your biggest takeaway from today? What is an action point that you will take from today's session? For those of you that are new to the Thrive in China Roundtable, just to give you a little bit of background on Woodburn and what we can do for you, we offer a variety of administrative services, everything from brand advisory, trademark search and registrations, all the way through implementations, incorporations, all the way through to the outsourcing solutions for accounting, tax, and payroll functions. We also help to build in-house finance teams so that you have the right people that are working within your organizations. And if you're interested in learning more about what is happening within your China business, how you could potentially, save on your profit margins, how you can reduce cost, if you are interested in doing a health check within your organization on how to make it more efficient or improve just operationally as well, we offer these types of health checks too. So if you want to email me at Kristina@woodburnglobal.com, we can organize a one-to-one conversation regarding that. And last but not least, although our offices are closed next week for the national holidays, I'm still going to be doing a Thrive in China Roundtable on how to employ talent in China with or without an on-the-ground structure. The next episodes within the Thrive in China Roundtable are really about employment, how to manage foreign workers in China, how to manage local workers in China, what you need to think about from a salary perspective, social insurance, visas, etc. How to nurture employees as well. So if you're interested in any of these topics, you're already subscribed, so just come along and join on Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central European Time. For those of you that have joined live, thank you very much. And again, like I said, if you've got any questions, just insert them into the chat box. And as soon as I stop the recording, we can discuss. Thank you, everyone, and see you again soon. Take care and goodbye.